let's start with like how you cope with
the power of comedians.
The power of comedy, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because like all of a sudden comics became people with opinions that were supposed to be like as valuable as politicians.
Right.
Like I can't remember when that transition happened because for ages it was like, oh, we just love comedians because it's such a down-to-earth thing to do and to do well, so people just liked it because they were like they idolised the art of it or they liked the humanness of the people doing it. And then all of a sudden comedians started being the hosts of talk shows and the hosts of things and podcasting came along and then it became, oh, you have to have an opinion on things if you're a comedian because people listen to you.
Yeah.
So you have to use your platform to have something to say.
Right.
Which is an interesting one because none of us got into comedy with that in mind. Some people might have. Some people definitely might have seen the two things interweaving and thought this is a great way for power or this is a great way to have my voice heard. I got into it because I like to entertain people and make them feel better. And it's interesting because even at my level, which is I guess a bit above emerging but not quite famous established, I'm in that like middle ground, I'm expected to have an opinion on things, especially in Darwin. Like I'll be out at dinner and people will come over and be like, oh, did you see this? What do you think about that?
Yep.
And it's not a consensual part of being in the public eye where I've gone, oh, I've got opinions and I want to share them.
Yep.
I'm not that kind of person. But there's an expectation of using your platforms.
Right.
You know, like, you know, are you going to speak out about this or how do you feel about that?
Yep.
Is an expectation, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like everybody else. My opinion isn't any more important than anyone else's, I think. But yeah, it's interesting because like they'll get them in to talk in the media about stuff. Like when Arj Barker kicked the mum out of his show for having a baby, if you saw that beginning of the year.
Yeah, because I've seen Arj Barker a few times live. Funny guy.
Yeah, funny guy.
Yep.
Handled that terribly.
Right.
But people were expecting him to have like more opinions on why he did it and what was going on and do you hate this or do you – like they wanted him to have more. And at the base of it, he was distracted by the baby and he handled it terribly.
Right.
But it was just that moment. It wasn't a political thing. But
It wasn't making a statement or anything.
And it got
just
turned into a political thing by the media cycle.
Yes.
So much so that even I was called to weigh into it because I do the baby-friendly shows around Australia.
Yep.
So I was on Triple J Hack and on Channel 7 and 10 with people being like, well, how do you feel about it?
Yep.
And I was like, how do I feel about Arj? Arj had a moment. That's fine. That doesn't mean he has a political stance on it. I think there's some spaces where baby, you know, like it's like, why am I the person to talk about this?
Sure.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an old saying that says, you know, in every joke there's a tiny amount of truth or like a tiny revolution. Like how do you reconcile that? Do you think that's true? Like does a joke have to have some truth to it to be funny? Can it be completely untrue and be funny? Is there some like
I think it's got to have some
leeway?
It's got to have something that the audience believes.
So they can tie it to.
Because one of the things that stops an audience from laughing is if they don't believe your joke.
Right.
Because if I say a premise and somebody goes, I don't think she did that, they're not going to go with the punchline.
Okay.
So it's got to have an element of truth or an element of what you actually believe to fly.
So it can't be so absurd then that like it's so stupid that it's funny anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's another rule of comedy. You can go that far, but you can't do that format the whole way through a show.
Right.
That absurd out of this world thing can happen once or twice in a set. Otherwise people work out your formula. Because part of comedy is surprise. Oh my God, I could nerd out so hard on comedy formula. I love it.
Yeah.
They need to be surprised by what you're saying. So if you're doing absurd, after a while they go, huh.
Right.
But if you throw an absurd in, it helps. But yeah, I think an element of truth, and you need to believe in what you're saying. I think if you say a joke, you need to be able to say to people why it's funny.
Yep.
You know, if people are offended by something, you need to be able to say, well, I think it's funny because of this and I stand by it. If you say something that you're like, oh, I don't know, you tell me whether that's funny or you tell me whether that's rude, the audience will not go on with you.
Right.
Because you see comedians sometimes say something and then they kind of take it away, like,
Backtrack.
oh, you know, or, you know.
Like fence sitting. And
and just don't say it with conviction, that you don't get the same laughs as if you say something.
Yep. Because, like, I mean, comedian crowds, they'll smell blood, won't they? Like, they'll know if you aren't true to your convictions and they'll hold you to it.
I think they're far more intelligent than sometimes we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And I think as well, when you go to see comedy, you don't want to see somebody get up there and throw ideas at you without their own thought. It just seems half baked.
Yeah.
You gotta have something in it.
Yeah.
Gotta have something at stake.
Do you think comedy is a test of a society maybe to see how free its speech is? You know, like if
This question feels like a test.
it doesn't have to be, you can say yes or no and then we can move on.
No, it's fun. It's fun. It's so fun reflecting on your practice because you don't get much opportunity to do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess an easy way to
It
sort of
is.
put it in terms of like in different countries, you've got less ability to maybe tell jokes about, say, the government or officials or celebrities even.
Yeah.
Like somewhere like Australia, I feel like we're pretty free to have a crack at
I think that's important.
the top brass.
I think that's really important.
Yep.
I think being able to laugh at those things is essential. I think being able to be clever is essential with it. Like if you're going for just dumb punchlines, meh.
Yep.
But you gotta be clever. You gotta hold people accountable. Parody is so important. Like being able to take the piss in Australia is really, really important. I think if you can't laugh at yourself, that's losing a bit of the value of stuff.
Yep.
Like I do a lot of jokes about like public servants and the current government and stuff. Like they're silly ones.
Yep.
Like I'm not going in there and being like dark about it.
Yeah.
There's little jokes there.
Is it like Utopia-esque or is it
totally.
sort of,
Utopia-esque, absolutely. Or, like the Kavanagh shade structure itself has always been a punchline for me.
Yep.
And if there was a world where I couldn't say that, that's problematic.
Yeah.
Right? That's really problematic. But I don't think that saying freedom of speech as a defense for saying gross, dangerous, harmful things is a healthy dialogue that's happening at the moment.
Right.
Sometimes you see it and you're like, oh, but freedom of speech at what cost to make other people feel powerless? It's the concept of punching up, right? If you're punching down in comedy, you're not actually being that funny.
Right.
You've got to use your power in comedy to say something new and to be funny in a, like, for me as a straight, white, middle-aged, kind of affluent, I guess, in some ways, because I have a home. Like I can't make jokes about a whole group of people. I don't think I have anything that's funny to say. But white men, I think there's something about it's not that you can or can't say something. I don't feel comfortable with anything I have to say that would belittle someone without power.
Right.
But that's also my philosophy with it.
Okay.
I don't want anyone to come into a show and feel like they're being teased or bullied. And to be honest, I don't do a lot of that kind of material anyway. Like I don't even make fun of all men because most of my jokes are about myself or about my family.
Yep. Self-deprecating.
Yeah. Because I don't feel comfortable in conflict. It's not something I've ever felt comfortable in.
So is there an expectation like as an audience member then to maybe going to a show and, I don't know, like maybe letting your guard down?
Yeah. I think if you're going to a comedy show, you
got to be prepared, don't you?
I think you've got to go, all right, I'm at a comedy show. Some things that are going to be said might not be fully cooked yet.
Yeah.
And I need to make a decision as a consumer of this art how I'm going to respond to it.
Yeah.
So if you're going to an hour show by somebody who you know does stuff that's on the edge because of their brand and that's who they're talking to, and you go in there and then you go, I got offended, you've made a choice with how you've spent your money and how you've spent your time. You need to own and have responsibility for that.
Yeah.
If you go to an open mic night down here at the wonderful Top Floor Comedy and you get offended by something that somebody is saying on stage and it's like their second gig ever and they're learning a new craft, grow up, maybe. Like I'm not saying you can't not be like you can't be offended. You're allowed to be offended.
Yeah, it's your right to be offended.
You're allowed to be offended, but you have to think about the entire context in which you've experienced that offence. And is it worth dying on a hill to hurt somebody's emerging career because of one thing that they've said at an open mic night as they're developing new material?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's ever worth.
And I think it probably opens up a broader question about if you have a right to be offended, but does someone also have a right to offend? You know, like that's a deeper question, I guess.
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
I don't think that we should hurt people. I think sometimes people get hurt.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's all subjective.
Yeah.
So like someone may not have said something to hurt.
Yeah.
someone may have taken it
Yeah.
to heart,
I think as a comedian.
which is a really hard thing to, like,
Yeah.
as a society, how do we figure that out? Like,
It's so tricky, isn't it? Because it's also tricky because if you have a platform and a microphone, you have power.
mm-hmm.
And how you use that power needs to be thought about. So if you go up there and you are doing racial slurs or homophobic material, why? Why are you up there doing that? What is your goal?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, to me, feel as if you're trying to make people laugh. As comedians, our job is to entertain people. And if you get up there and you say things that are horrific, is that because you think it's funny? And because you think the audience is going to think it's funny? Or are you doing that to serve a greater purpose for yourself that's actually quite harmful? Why are you saying it? And if you can answer that question, go for gold.
Yeah.